Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Linemiller, your host. Have you wondered about applications for robotics in the food industry? I have, and thinking about how to make that work, it gets complicated. Well, we have a CEO for Forage Robotics with us, Sean O'Connor, and he's going to just share all the insider secrets about getting robotics to work in the food industry. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Right on. Thanks for having me, Pam. Super excited to be here. And yeah, excited to talk about the world of robots and mushrooms.
Yeah. Oh, mushrooms. Yes. So the part of the food industry is the mushrooms. That's the fun part that we're going to talk about. But it is true that we've been trying to figure out applications for robotics that are systematized that will work as the whole robotics situation should without a lot of human input, et cetera. Well, tell us about the mushrooms and why you centered on that particular product.
Yeah, right on. And yeah, super excited to chat through why is now is such an exciting point for robots in the food space. I'll go through our journey there and talk about some of
Yeah.
the other cool things that we're seeing too. But starting with the mushroom industry itself, it is the perfect place for robot applications. And before we get into kind of what automation is happening in mushrooms here, would it be cool if I just give kind of a 10,000 foot overview of how mushrooms are grown for the audience?
That would be perfect.
Okay, right on. Look, we saw this huge wave of vertical agriculture taking off over the last kind of 4 or 5 years as we saw indoor ag really, you know, seeing a large influx of capital. And it was funny in the mushroom industry how many folks were like, "Hey, we've been doing this for 40 years. Why is no one talking about us?" Really, because they were able to take all of the good with vertical agriculture and indoor agriculture without having to recreate the sun because mushrooms don't need sun. They don't need darkness, they don't need light. It really isn't an impact on the whole growing cycle. And so as the industry has evolved in the mushroom space, they've really been able to take the idea of vertical agriculture. How do we grow more food in a smaller footprint of an area, i.e., put shelves on top of each other and go upwards. And so the farms in the mushroom space are largely called what's the Dutch rack farming system, popularized over the last kind of 30 to 40 years. And you go into these farms and they're all pretty much the same, where it's a big industrial building. It has 20 to 60 rooms in it. And then each room has 2 to 4 aluminum shelves, usually stacked 6 shelves high. And you have this really uniform way of growing mushrooms where you put the compost and mycelium in, it grows for a couple of weeks. You harvest it for 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the farm cycle. You pull it out of the room and you start over again. So you have this wonderfully efficient industry, highly profitable industry as well, and really is one of the driving factors on how do we grow food closer to large human centers. It's at the forefront of food security. It's both good for the climate as well as doesn't really care about the climate because it's in these indoor facilities. So it's an aid towards how do we grow more food without impacting the environment. But also as that impact is happening, which we're unfortunately seeing more and more of, mushrooms can still grow in a really reliable way and deliver large amounts of food. Um, but one of the challenges that it faces is access to labor. Not unique to the world of agriculture, but I would say more profound than any other forms of agriculture because you're harvesting every day. So within these rooms, you've got all these tiny little mushrooms that are scattered together and clumped together, but growing at an enormous rate. So they grow at 4% an hour. They double in size every day.
Oh
And so
my
you have this
goodness.
unique challenge where the whole world in agriculture is looking for good people to come in and do work. And that's not, but in the industry for mushrooms, they need those people to come in every day to pick mushrooms. Because if you are not there on harvesting day for some of the rooms, the mushrooms start bumping into each other and becoming misshapen, or their caps open up and they sell at a huge discount. So you have all these issues when it comes to quality and yield if you don't pick a mushroom exactly at the right time. So very chaotic logistics engine to be able to harvest this food and get it out into the world. So that's the general ethos of the industry. It's facing the same problems as the rest of agriculture. I would say just more extreme
Yeah.
because of how frequently it needs to be harvested.
Well, let's level set for a minute. So that's a great overview for those of us, including me, who don't know how mushrooms grow and about that harvest cycle, that really it's a daily harvesting depending on, the pacing of the mushrooms and what's set
Absolutely.
up there, or maybe even, some are ready at 12 o'clock noon and some are ready at 12 o'clock midnight, right? So
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
kind of a 24-hour cycle. So the fact that you have that frequency of harvesting, it's not like you can go do the entire crop, maybe like wheat out in a field, for example. It's different than that. But the other part of it that is helpful is that there's consistency in how these mushroom growing operations are set up, as you explain the infrastructure and the setting. So that gives us the access to labor problem as well as the consistency of the infrastructure setup. That gives the perfect opportunity to have a robotic solution. So that's why you have this idea.
Yeah, you're exactly right now. Like the wonderful outcome is if you can solve the problem, and it's not an easy problem to solve. We'll go into all the challenges we've faced and other companies have faced in the space. But if you can solve the problem immediately, every farm in the world, or call it 95% of the farms in the world, have a setup that is perfect for your robots to enter. So you have this like huge ability where you don't need to renovate their farms or ask them to build a new farm or do any of these other pieces. You've got a solution that can be plugged into their current infrastructure, which is again the ideal space for robots to be. Like robots in agriculture is very challenging, largely because of how many different variables and factors there are, whether it's indoor or outdoor, and all the challenges that come with it. So the big piece that we have the opportunity to do is if you can build a solution that works, every farm in the world can be your customer and they can start working with your robots without needing a complete changeover. So it gives us a huge advantage over other ag tech companies that are building solutions for a certain type of farm that's not necessarily as uniform, whether it's in the outdoor canola, wheat, or corn space, because you have all these other challenging variables you have to deal with.
Right. And this is not a small industry. Like your potential market is not small. I forget the number.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's huge. Like there's over $60 billion of mushrooms purchased annually, about $98 billion or 98 billion tons of mushrooms produced annually around the world. And the majority of that is just regular white and brown mushrooms. So white button, brown button, creminis, portobellos, all those types of things that are just your consistent circle. And that's what our robots focus on, and those are all the ones that are growing in this Dutch rack farming system. So once you solve the problem, really big market to work with.
Yeah, amazing. And so that, a portion of that market is definitely adequate, right?
Absolutely.
Good job. Now, so as you sought to start out finding a solution in the robotic space, I know it wasn't, a straight line because you had a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, exactly. And look, there's a deep graveyard of companies that have tried and failed at this. And certainly we felt like we were, one foot into the graveyard ourselves along the way. It's because it's such a huge problem in such a big industry. CEOs like me have been saying we're going to solve this for 30 years now. People have been talking about robotics in mushroom farming. Every new company gets invited to the annual mushroom conference around the world, whether it's the European one or the North American one or the Australian one. We stand on stage and say we're going to change your industry, and they all roll their eyes, and then a few years later we go bankrupt. And so it's been a pretty tough cycle for the industry when it comes to building robots that can actually work and solve their problems. And that was not unique to us. Like our V1 robot we took on farm over 4 years ago now, which by the way, no one ever calls their first robot the V1 robot. It's supposed to be the robot that just works. We're
Right.
on our version 4 robot now, just to show you kind of how challenging it's been. It's taken about 5 years longer and millions of dollars more than we thought it would. And really, this the core challenges that we face that are not unique to all the other companies that have tried in this space is first is how can you reliably see every mushroom? So you've got this bed of mushroom that has thousands or tens of thousands of mushrooms on it. They're all very small. They're growing in a chaotic way. They're seeing where each mushroom starts and ends and not classifying a cluster of mushrooms as one mushroom. So that's a very challenging task and one that you needed both a strong team, which we have, as well as just timing of the world. Like computer vision is finally at a stage now where the equipment that we use and the technology that we use is sophisticated and cheap enough to be able to do that in a reliable way. So one
Okay.
is, can I see every mushroom? The second is, can I pick the mushroom without damaging it? So you have this crop that's growing at 4% an hour, you need to pick really quickly. But at the same time, um, it's more delicate than a tomato or strawberry. It's the most fragile of all the produce items. It bruises really easily. It splits easily. Um, and so finding a way to pick the mushroom without damaging it was key. And so we developed this suction cup technology where we used a essentially an off-the-shelf suction cup to pick these mushrooms. We would be able to automatically change the size of the suction cup. So depending on the size of the mushroom, we could pick it. And we were, picking hundreds of pounds of mushrooms in our facility, and they looked beautiful, looked great. We took it down to our first customer and started using this. And we were picking the mushrooms. They would look great, be put in the box, trimmed, and everything was perfect. They'd be sent off to the cold room or the packing room. And then after like 4 or 5 hours, they would start to get these rings, like these hickeys
Oh
almost, or
no.
bruises. It's just devastating. And so we were, came back. Our robot was pushed off farm, tail between our legs, going, "Oh no!" Like we've got this huge
Mm.
issue where we were marking the mushrooms, but it took hours for us to see the marks. And so by the time it would get to the grocery store, it would have all these awful circles around. People don't want that. And so we started working with robotic fingers, so trying to use kind of really high fidelity, flexible fingers that can easily pick within these clusters. And that was a disaster. Like it was just there, even with the best robotic fingers, we just couldn't find a way to pick mushrooms in these tight clusters without damaging the surrounding mushrooms.
Right.
And that's not unique to mushrooms. Like so Chris and I, who run this business, we spent a couple days picking mushrooms down on farm, and we showed up, and the harvest manager like grabbed our hands, and she goes, "You'd never make it. Your fingers are too fat. Like you just don't. Like even certain people just don't have the dexterity to be able to do
Okay.
this in a way that doesn't harm the mushrooms."
Well,
So that was
Sean,
a
I had no idea mushrooms were so finicky. Honestly,
uh, it's a I have so much respect for mushroom harvesters. Like it's a very, very difficult job. It's not
yeah.
a very enjoyable job. It's a the mushroom farms probably treat their employees the best in the world because they know how challenging it is. So they go above and beyond in terms of how they cater towards their harvesting employees and make their lives better. But the actual act of picking mushrooms, like you're in between these 6 shelves in the room, bent over all day. You have to pick mushrooms really quickly, and every time you get a little bit sloppy, you end up damaging some. And like it's really a difficult job that requires hard work and tremendous focus. And so, yeah, not an easy one for robotics to solve. So we're working with these robotic fingers. We figured, oh, we're not going to be able to solve this. So we went back to the suction cup process, but we built something that is entirely in-house, a proprietary approach to building this.
Okay.
And it really works more like an octopus than it does a suction cup. So the whole idea is how do we spread the force around the mushroom so you don't have this tight ring of force that's being applied on the surface area of the mushroom. And that's how we finally got away with the problem number two, which is how do we pick these mushrooms without damaging them.
Yeah.
And then the third one, which is again another fascinating challenge, a combination of we needed a great team and we also needed the world to just catch up to be able to be put in a spot. And that's the complicated mechanism for deciding which mushrooms should you pick. Like you mentioned earlier, Pam, picking a mushroom at 12 in the afternoon versus 12 midnight has two very different outcomes. If you pick it at 12 and it's too small, you could have gained an extra 50% by
Right.
midnight. And that's a lot of revenue that if you keep doing that over and over on millions of mushrooms. Whereas if you see it and it looks like it's about the right size, but then you leave it till 12 at midnight, maybe the gills start opening up and now it turns into a low value product or even a waste product. And
Right.
so you have this fascinating challenge of this huge logistics engine across all of these beds of I see all these mushrooms. When should I pick them to optimize for the highest amount of quality and yield? And so we built all of these software rules saying, based on the spatial awareness of how we see mushrooms, and we see them here, 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 we'll pick that one at this time. We'll come back and pick that one later. And then we would screw up and they would say, oh, you did the wrong thing here. And you could see it. Like the yield from our rooms was worse than the yield from all the other rooms.
Ah,
And then we would go, oh, okay, well, let's add another rule, and we'll add another rule. And each time we found a new edge case, we'd add another rule. And we had like this archaic if the stack of if statements on like all these rules for the robot to
yeah.
follow. And each time we screwed up, we would add another one. And we just learned that like software was not going to solve this. Software was not going to be able to be a piece that could say, here's what mushrooms you should pick. And a good indicator for why we should have known this years before and millions of dollars before we made the mistake is that even a person who shows up and picks mushrooms, they're not very good for like 10 weeks. Like it takes a
Uh-huh.
long time to train someone to be optimized for how they pick mushrooms, how they thin the beds or manage the beds to create the optimal amount of space so mushrooms can use the most amount of nutrients to grow as large and high quality as possible.
Right.
And
Well,
so
as
we
a, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I mean, I used to be a programmer, so I totally get it. And as you add all of these rules in there, also your response time, I mean, you can't
totally
process it fast enough because as you start adding, it's got to go through all of it, even though it's maybe a split second or maybe two, then you're just adding complexity and room for error, right? And it's kind of
yeah,
like that whack-a-mole game, I guess.
exactly.
You're
Like
trying
it's
to,
you fall behind. We were slow too, so we weren't fast enough to
yep.
keep up. And I think a big part of that was because of the processing time. You're absolutely right.
Mhm.
And even
Yeah.
then, we were just never going to be good enough. So we abandoned software and we leaned entirely into AI. So our AI
Ah,
team worked with the smartest harvesters in the world across a variety of farms. They said, "Here's a bunch of images of mushrooms." And just tell the robot which ones to pick, which was a great day for them because they didn't have to be bent over picking mushrooms all day. They were able to kind of, we were able to recreate their brain and put it in our robots. And the cool part is every farm is a little bit different for how they like to pick and manage the different sizes they're optimizing for, how clustered they set the beds when they put them in there in the first place. So they can all just put their best harvesters in front of our robots, annotate images for a couple of days, put their brains in our robots. And then you can walk along, and anytime you don't like what the robot did, it'll show you the image that it saw. You just say, you pick this one, don't do that next time, pick that one, and you just continuously train it. So it's just pattern recognition that you feed in. So whether you have 20 or 2,000 robots that you purchase from us, because these farms are quite large, you can make them all think one way and think your way, which has been the breakthrough that we needed to finally get to a point where we can outproduce human beings from a yield perspective.
okay, so that is fascinating. First of all, AI technology, we love technology here at Future Foodcast and application in the food industry. It finally caught up with what you needed. And I would say the benefits, I mean, the cost of the robot obviously is expensive, but also so is the labor cost and the turnover of the labor and the training of the labor, which you said it could be 10 weeks. So
Right.
with this, you can train a robot brain with a short amount of time to be able to duplicate what that particular farm owner wants, and then however many robots they need, they can all have that same input. So you're
Exactly.
training a whole workforce of robots with essentially one training iteration, and then you can duplicate that across. I would think that is a huge multiplication of effort. Wow.
It's really neat. And the cool part is that like today we're saying we can get to the best output of your best harvester, which is still about a 20 to 30% lift over your kind of new harvester. So a huge impact on revenue and yield.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure in the future, we're going to be able to use AI and collecting all of the data that we've seen in terms of how we're picking data on temperature and water content and everything else in the room, and we'll be able to give insights back to the farm saying, hey, here's how you can actually get more revenue. And the cool part for us is that we care again, we're based in Salmon Arm, British Columbia, one of the most beautiful places in the entire world, but it is a place that is facing the impacts of climate change, most namely through forest fires every summer. We care deeply about one of the biggest problems that ag tech is trying to solve, which is how do we grow more food using the same or less inputs and releasing the same or less amount of carbon dioxide. Robots is a big way of doing that. If you can use them to pick for 24 hours a day, so you can pick that mushroom at midnight as opposed to 3 p.m. when the shift ends, and then to pick it when it's at its optimal size because of the AI and recognition that you've applied to your picking algorithms, you're going to be able to produce significantly more food with the exact same amount of inputs. So it's more revenue for the customer, less of an environmental impact on farming. Really, a solution where everyone wins. we're pretty excited about what the next year or two looks like now that we've got a bunch of new farms that have signed up over the last few months.
Very exciting. And then back to the labor issue that you brought up. So you have, there's positives and negatives there, right? You have the robotics that are taking the place of the labor, which was hard to get people to do that job and a long training cycle. But you probably also you talked about location. I mean, you can't just be out in the middle of nowhere where land is cheap to build
Right.
these mushroom farms because you need people to be able to get there to work. But now with robotics,
It's going to change where you can put these farms. You can put them probably closer to major urban centers as well, because mushrooms are not a good produce to travel. Like they need to be refrigerated from the moment you pick them until they end up in the grocery cart. So you can have smaller farms closer to major urban centers as opposed to
okay.
these large ones that have concentration, like you're saying, having a large concentration of employees to draw on. You can
Yeah.
optimize for land costs, just like you mentioned. Like it's going to recreate how farms think about where they want to build their next farm and how they want to build from there. So I think it's look the the world of innovation and robots is going to replace a lot of jobs. I think that's an important topic, and happy to jam on ideas with you there because there is the uncomfortable truth that comes with that as well.
Yeah.
But it also is going to recreate the opportunity for how do we do things and why do we do things in certain areas to optimize for the best outcome. And when you take probably the most perishable of all the produce items at the grocery store, there's a lot of good you can do if you introduce robots to making sure that you can produce that food closer to the grocery store and closer to the people.
Yeah. So it sounds like improved product to the consumer, first of all, because we're going to be able to eliminate maybe some of those travel challenges and obviously the harvesting, maybe less waste for the farm owner because the
Absolutely.
ideal picking is going to happen. The robot is going to be able to discern that, and we take the people out of it. But let's talk about the people because you can maybe redeploy them in other places on the farm, maybe not as many, but I don't know.
I,
What are your ideas? You want to jam on it?
totally. Yeah. No, like,
Talk
I'm going to
about
give you like
some thoughts that you have because labor is an issue. So there's other places where they can work within the agriculture industry.
totally. And look, I'm going to give you a pretty incomplete answer. Like this is
Sure,
something that we're still very early in our journey in thinking through. And
sure.
before we get there too, like there is the inevitability of innovation that happens. Like my great grandfather immigrated from Iceland to Canada, and his first job, he was living in Gimli, Manitoba. His first job was to cut ice on Lake Winnipeg, which my kids didn't believe me was a real thing until the movie Frozen came out. And in
Okay.
one of the backbones of the Frozen story, well, maybe for someone who's a nerd like me looking out for it, is that there's a main character and he is essentially an ice delivery driver. And at the start, the opening montage, they're cutting ice, and so it was an industry built on the ice box, which is essentially the refrigerator, made
Mhm.
meaningless very quickly. And so this is not new. Like anytime new innovations come in, it's displaced jobs, it's created new opportunities, and it's also created um, the necessity for society and the community to think through how are we going to figure out places for these people to go.
Yeah.
Now, the benefit that we have is no one's going to lose their job because of robots that pick mushrooms. The natural turnover in the industry is about 40% annually. So it
Wow.
really is a job that you use generally as an introductory point to move to a new country or a new location. And then you start looking for other jobs because despite how well these farms treat their employees, and they really, again, they're up there with the best in the world that I've seen in agriculture. Um, the job is just very difficult. So it
Yeah.
has a natural amount of turnover because of how difficult of a position it is. And so we can't build robots fast enough to even replace the natural turnover within one farm, let alone the 5 farms we have signing up and looks like 6 or 7 fairly quickly here.
Wow.
And so it just means they'll hire a few less people every month, that they'll have a few more robots come in. And then,
Okay.
like you said, the other piece is it's going to create a lot of high value jobs. So you're going to need new service and maintenance people in these areas, new people who are professionals at um, optimizing the robots to increase yield. And again, all those people are going to be those who are harvesters today, who are watching our robots today, who know far more about mushrooms and mushroom harvesting than
Yeah.
anyone at Forge Robotics does. We're a bunch of robot and tech nerds sitting in Canada. We're not going to be the ones who figure out how to optimize using our robots. And so I think that from that perspective, I'm excited at the new jobs it's going to create. I'm cognizant that it's going to mean less jobs overall. And I think that we need to find, if we want to continue, accelerating a path to bring new immigrants to Europe or Canada or the US that typically are coming into these mushroom farms and picking, what are the other opportunities we want to give them to be integrated into society? And look, I don't have a great answer for today, just that I know it's one that we can collectively solve because we've done it as human beings for hundreds of years now.
Right. But Sean, I think while you're looking, it's really that entry point problem. And for the farm owner, you're solving their attrition problem.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can bring in robots as they have that natural attrition and do that gradual replacement. I mean, that sounds like a great option to me. So,
You're
you can,
absolutely
like you
right.
said, yeah, redeploy those farmers
Like these
if they're
farms are
hurt.
not saying we've got a huge issue with the cost of labor. They're saying we have a huge issue with getting people to show up and pick mushrooms. And
Yeah,
the costing side needs to make sense. Like we need to show that our robots have a payback period of 2 years. Like we need to give them comfort that this is
sure.
financially a sound decision. But the main problem we're solving is like I can't find people to come and pick mushrooms. And so
Yeah.
that's where our aluminum beauties can come do that.
Well, and before we go, real quick for our audience who might be food entrepreneurs themselves or somehow entrepreneurs with the food industry. I mean, I'm saying food entrepreneur, you're really a robotic entrepreneur who's applying your technology to the food industry. Thank you for doing that, by the way. Do you
Absolutely.
have any thoughts for some people? I mean, just getting them set up. It's like I said, it wasn't a straight road for you. You didn't name your robot number one, version one, because that was going to be the robot. And here we are with version four. I'm sure we'll think there will be a version five. Like technology keeps moving on and you're morphing with that and taking advantage of that as you go. But what would you
Yeah.
say to that entrepreneur who's thinking about getting started in some kind of business or maybe already has?
Um, yeah, so I'd say number one is like this is a ton of fun. It's really challenging. So like you got to be up for the heartache that comes with building in the hardware robotic space. Is it's a very, very difficult position to be in. But the outcome is like if you can pull it off, like we have, you can be the very best company in the entire world in your space. And look, I can still screw this up 1,000 different ways. Maybe Ford goes into the ether one day, but like to right now in this position that we're in, we are the best company in the entire world at picking mushrooms. That's pretty
Okay.
cool. We have the opportunity to
Congratulations.
really, yeah. Oh, thank you. And so I think from that perspective, like, what an awesome opportunity for entrepreneurs to be taking this on.
Yeah.
So the second piece is like, the world is finally set up for you now to do this. Like, computer vision and AI have finally got to a point where you can reliably see the things that you're trying to see and then understand what you should be doing when there's complex and different variables to take the next steps after you've identified what you've seen. That was not the case 10 years ago. So if you're like now thinking, why will robots finally start working? It's because we can see stuff properly and then we can process variable information and understand to what the next steps should be, what we can see. That was not the case. So robots are about to see one of the greatest kind of steps of innovation that we've ever
Yeah.
seen before as they move into these unstructured environments, which is so exciting for me. And then the flip side is find investors who get it. Like we have been so lucky at Forge Robotics. We raised $17.5 million at the end of last year from a bunch of great investors here in Canada through BDC, NBC, Lex Capital, Jim Richardson Family Office, and Emertech, and among a bunch of other private investors too. The power there is that they're not expecting you to turn everything around the next day. This isn't the software world where one small breakthrough all of a sudden you've got this perfect company. They understand that even every win comes with a new set of challenges when you're building and manufacturing robots.
Yeah.
And so you really need to find investors who understand the long game, who understand that you can create a category leader, $1 billion company, if you're able to be successful in this path, but
Yeah.
that it's not a linear path like you would see in a lot of the kind of software world. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, general feedback would be absolutely go for it. Seize this moment in time we're at when it comes to computer vision and AI, and then find great investors who can understand the non-linear journey of building a robotics and hardware company.
Wow. Thank you, Sean, for bringing all this information to us. And I'm just thrilled for the the success that you've had. I mean, it's kind of once you get to turn the corner, that sweet success, right? Which now is another challenge on its own, the whole scalability. And here you go out into the market, and you've figured out the technology, the innovation is there, at least for version 4 of your robot, and you're launching. So now that scalability and keeping up with all that. But I know you're happy to take on those challenges.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun. We're enjoying it. It's long hours, but it's fulfilling work, and we're pretty excited at what the next steps look like. A few new features we're building to get deployed, and really try and make sure this turns into a stable and long lasting business.
Very exciting. Again, thanks for being with us. And to our audience, thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more episodes like this about technology and innovation and how people are impacting the food industry, listen in and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next week, I'm Pam Line-Miller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.